Take it off.
What? What?
Hey, what's going on, guys? At the time of my recording this video, I've just finished watching episode 4 of My Adventures with Superman, which means the season's probably already over and World War III just started or something. I don't know. I never actually know when I'm gonna sit down and edit these things, let alone upload them. But this is a show that I've been excited for ever since it got announced at DC Fandom back in like 2021. And for a year and a half, the only thing we had to go off of were these 3 images. One of Lois holding Clark in a headlock while Jimmy Olsen just stood in the background doing his best Adam 22 impersonation. The other was Lois and Jimmy acting silly while Clark was walking through the park. And the third was a concept logo I think they were working with. And it was a very classic looking Superman logo, which at the time was refreshing because we were still hip deep in the Snyder Era, which I'm gonna use that term pretty loosely, because if we're gonna be honest, the dark and grittyfication of Superman started long before Zack Snyder was even hired to direct those movies. Ironically, I think it starts with Jeff Johns and Gary Frank with their run on Action Comics, and that series is weird because it's riffing off of the aesthetic, and even at some points acting as a straight up sequel to the Donner Superman movies, but acting as if they were rated R or a hard PG-13 because their entire run ranged from being violently bittersweet to absolutely soul-draining. And then we got Superman Earth 1, which for all intents and purposes is a storyboard for Man of Steel, and then we got the New 52, and then we got Injustice, and then we got Zack Snyder, and everything sort of just spiraled from there. So it's not really Zack Snyder's fault. If anything, he was just going with the flow of what was happening at the time. So I feel like he shouldn't be the one to have to wear that crown of thorns, but he's the designated internet whipping boy, so I guess it's his fault because everyone else says so. But over the months, we got little details here and there, like I think Michael Emerson was officially cast as Brainiac, and then Jack Quaid is cast as Superman, but it was all at a creeping pace. So that, coupled with everything that was going on at Cartoon Network over the past couple of years, it really felt like this show was gonna die. But it's here now, and so far, I'm really enjoying it. So the big thing with this show is that this is Superman by way of an anime influence, which I know is kind of a turnoff for classic Superman fans, but one of the things I really like about the anime aesthetic is that it proves the point that I keep making about Superman and how versatile of a character he is, which I think goes for all of DC's characters, quite frankly, especially compared to Marvel. I think DC characters are interesting in that you can put them in any medium of any genre and they work just fine. But when you futz around with Marvel characters too hard, you tend to break them. But I say all this to say, this show is a breath of fresh air, because it's doing something with Superman that nobody's ever really seen before. And it's kind of weird because, and I'm sure I'm just saying this because I'm a comic book reader, but seeing people who typically aren't Superman fans saying that they like the show because Clark Kent is endearing and relatable, but Superman is a badass, and Lois Lane is sparky and cute, and I'm like, yeah, join the party. You know, we've been saying this for a while now. Now that said, this show is not a one-for-one, beat-for-beat adaptation of the comics. It is very much a reinvention of this character. In fact, the show has a lot in common with the 2004 Batman cartoon, because that was a show that, at the time, a lot of people resisted because it was very different aesthetically. It was redesigning characters, it was reinventing characters. I remember people at the time nicknaming it Ultimate Batman, because at the time, the Marvel Ultimate Universe was big in the comics, and for anybody who doesn't know, the Ultimate Universe was a comic book line that kept the bare bones of the Marvel Universe, but reinvented a lot of classic Marvel characters and changed some things around, and that's why people referred to the Batman as Ultimate Batman sometimes. But that also had a distinct anime influence in its reinvention of Batman and the world around him, and you can say the exact same thing for My Adventures with Superman. This is very much Ultimate Superman. The bare bones of the character and his mythology are there. Everything that makes the character traditionally work are there, but it's reimagined through this anime lens, which again, I've seen turn some people off, but I don't mind, personally. You know, I'm down for seeing something different, and so far, I really like most of the changes. Keyword being most. I like Clark and Jimmy being roommates. I really like Lois Lane's character redesign. I love how Metropolis looks like in East Coast San Francisco. That's a really neat idea. Intergalactic Roman Empire Krypton is a really cool concept. Greco-Roman god of war Jor-El is really cool, as is some of the Kryptonian technology. It's very post-Zack Snyder with the morphing geotech, because apparently the ship that brought Clark to Earth is like steadily growing underneath the Kent farm. And quick side tangent, by the way, I feel like that at some point in time is going to wind up being the Fortress of Solitude, whether it be underneath the Kent farm or if Clark decides to move it to the Arctic. I feel like it's going to be Clark's Fortress of Solitude at some point in this show. Also, a lot of the Kryptonian tech, it looks like, is the basis for the stolen military robots and weapons from the pilot episode. And that's the inciting incident for why Superman shows up in Metropolis in the first place. Which is another one of those things that I've seen people complain about, and I get it, but I just don't mind the change. I actually think it's really cool. Like, in the case of the Parasite, it's an unstable mech suit that's powered by kinetic energy, and when it doesn't get that energy, it starts eating its host.
Yeah, boy.
That's a really interesting reimagining of the Parasite. I also like that Professor Ivo is the one who builds it, and then he tries to pilot it, but then it starts eating him alive, and that's how he winds up looking like a malnourished walking tumor. But then there's other stuff like Deathstroke. I don't know, I'm just not feeling young, sexy, twinkified Slade Wilson. I'm just not. I'm not for that. It's not the mood. It's not the vibe. I also really don't like this show's version of Livewire. I think classic Livewire works just fine. In fact, I think she works better now than when she was created, because we have this whole culture of toxic e-girls, and I don't know. I think you can do something really interesting with Livewire right now, but instead they just made her an arms dealer. I guess. I don't know. I'm not really feeling that one. I'm also not a fan of the Superman costume. I like the more Kryptonian, alien in nature type Superman designs, but I also like the classic Superman costume with the vibrant colors and the silly outfit with the underwear on the outside, but not together. This just feels like pickles and ice cream. I like pickles, I like ice cream, but do not put my pickles in my ice cream. Don't do that. It just looks disgusting and weird. I don't like it. But outside of that, I'm liking the show so far. I really like how, at the end of the day, this is a romance show centered around Clark and Lois. But even then, the romance angle is flipped on its ear, because instead of the classic take where Clark is in love with Lois, who's in love with Superman, and she doesn't give Clark the time of day, here, Clark likes Lois. Lois likes Clark. But Clark isn't really all that confident or comfortable in his own skin, and because he feels more confident as Superman, he thinks that he has a better shot with Lois as Superman. But Lois actually hates Superman because she can tell that it's an act. Again, that's a really cute reinvention of classic Superman storytelling while still feeling like classic Superman. And I think that's the show's biggest strength so far. That said, something that I can see being a problem down the line, not just with this show, but with Superman in general, a problem this character has had since the 80s is a reactionary identity crisis. I think it starts with John Byrne and his Man of Steel miniseries. That book is looking at the 45 plus year history of the character at the time and running in the polar opposite direction. A lot of people at the time said that it made Superman feel like a Marvel character. His stories were a little grittier. Krypton went from being this sci-fi fantasy wonderland to becoming a dystopian wasteland. And that became the standard in comics for about 10 or so years. And then people started feeling more nostalgic for classic Superman, and this is when the City of Tomorrow era kicks off in the comics, and the stories are more whimsical and fun again. This is when we get Smallville, and then later Superman Returns, and the ball gets rolling on that Christopher Reeve nostalgia, which the comics themselves would later imitate. So much so to the point where Jeff Johns basically retcons that Superman the movie is the canonical origin for Superman in the comics. But then there's another 180 when everything starts to reject that Richard Donner, Christopher Reeve nostalgia, and everything is self-important and oppressive and edgy. But then this show comes along, and it's very cute, and in some ways feels like a reaction to the past decade of Superman comics and media. But I can totally see in the next 10 years this show being looked back on as Patient Zero, when Superman just turns into Steven Universe and he's fixing all of his problems with magical hugs and kisses, and he's leading armies of cotton candy fairies against Darkseid in space. I can totally see that happening, and people getting sick of it, and then we get another 180, and then you get Superman orally violating baby Hitler to death, and burning the S onto his chest with his heat vision like a brand, and I don't want that to happen, but given this character's track record, I can totally see that happening. But I'm just gonna leave it there. So far, I'm really liking the show, but what about you? Do you like My Adventures with Superman? Are you kind of turned off by anything in the show? And what do you think about the Superman costume design? Look, I really like Chris Anka. I think they're one of the best character designers in the business. I just personally think this was a miss. But let me know down below in the comment section. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button, share, support the channel. And if you want to see more content like this, all you have to do is subscribe. I am the Mystical Green Beanie. Thank you for watching, and as always, until next time, adios nachos, adios.